The Noble Build-Up is brought to you by 1G Racing, purveyors of the Noble M12 GTO in North America.
Very few cars have impressed me as much as the Noble M12, so when we got the opportunity to come here to Hi-Tech in South Africa, 8,000 miles from home, we jumped at it. Besides, it's winter back home. We also caught up with Jim Price, the founder of Hi-Tech, and asked him how he got involved with Lee Noble in this awesome little car.
I had read about Lee in magazines. He had produced a number of cars over the years. And then when Lee came out with the M12, he called me, and we went to have a look at it. And it was pretty damn clear he had a good car. It had already been shown to the press, and absolute rave reports. Lee also realized straight away that he couldn't get a factory into production quick enough. He came to South Africa, visited us here. In his words, he was gobsmacked. At the moment, we've probably built more than 350 vehicles for Lee to date, and we're currently running at about 16 to 20 a month. And he's got, this is the second generation we're busy with now, which is upgraded from the 2.5 to the 3 liter, and from the 5 to the 6-speed gearbox. And I think next year he's got another couple of upgrades coming as well. So he's a very talented man in being able to come up with a car that dynamically is up there with all the supercars, and obviously at a price that makes them all look embarrassed.
The Noble Build-Up is brought to you by 1G Racing, purveyors of the Noble M12 GTO in North America.
Well, once Lee Noble was confident that Hi-Tech here could actually build the car, bring it into production, keep in mind it was just a prototype when it was landed here. It was up to the guys here in engineering to actually put it on SolidWorks, a CAD program, and make sure they designed the fixtures properly, make sure it actually worked in reality in a production line process. And it was up to this guy, the man in front of the computer, Anton, to make sure it worked.
Okay, yeah, in engineering development, basically what we do is we create the models on the CAD package, and from those we would then create the drawings. From the drawings it would then go out to the shop, and we would make the first couple of prototypes, maybe a couple of changes here and there. And from that, once we're happy with the design and the function of the part, we would then manufacture jigs, fixtures, whatever the guys in production would need to manufacture the part. We would check those parts, see how they fit in the vehicle, do a couple of tests, whatever is necessary to ensure that the part is correct, and then once we're happy with that final product, then we would issue it out to production.
Obviously the guys here at Hi-Tech have used the computer to engineer the Noble and make it work. Because the Noble's a low-volume production vehicle, they build about 200 of these vehicles a year. The body's made out of fiberglass. It didn't make sense to make all these steel dies and stamping. It just doesn't make sense with 200 cars a year. But the fiberglass is a very, very nice material to work on if it's done properly. And the guys here at Hi-Tech, they've built this beautiful mold. The lines are crisp, the fit is nice. And then the fiberglass itself is hand-laid. There's 4 layers including this core mat, and the core mat is used in the entire body. Usually the core mat's used in high stress areas. Hi-Tech here uses it everywhere. So we've got 4 layers. Now each body is actually marked, and you can tell who the laminators were, you can tell what mold it was made out of, and you can tell what resin batch. So if there's ever an issue, it's all marked here like a big production company would use. Then what happens is it goes to the post-curing oven, and the whole idea there is to stabilize the fiberglass. The guys making fiberglass parts in their backyard, they don't do this, and often you'll see it's wavy, and you can see actually the mat starting to shrink, and you can see all these lines. Well, what they do is they stabilize the fiberglass by bringing it up to about 180 degrees. It's not going to get that hot again. They leave it there for 4 hours, and when it pops out of the mold, all the shrinking is finished. You're going to have a nice stable piece of fiberglass. From here, it's going to go to the body shop.
The Noble Build-Up is brought to you by 1G Racing, purveyors of the Noble M12 GTO in North America.
Well, we're here at High Tech where the Noble body has just been popped out of the mold. Now, all the seams from the mold, that's done in pieces, the mold comes apart, you see some fine seams. Well, they get ground down or sanded down, and then there's body filler applied. What happens next is they put the entire body onto the chassis. They make sure that all the body panels are numbered. And the reason they number the body panels to the chassis is when this car gets pulled apart again, they want to make sure this door belongs to this chassis, this bonnet belongs to this chassis, and they fit. Now, these guys spend a lot of time making sure door gaps are right. If you remember the muscle cars of the 60s, you had gaps that went from 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch down to 1/16. The fit and finish on this car is more like a Porsche or a Mercedes. Now, keep in mind, this is a fiberglass body. This is hard to do, and they're doing an excellent job with it. If you look inside, the dashboard is made out of fiberglass as well. The seams there will be sanded down, and it eventually gets painted, so it has to be proper too. Well, once all the body work is finished with latches in, windows in, fitted 100% on a dolly on the chassis, the way it's going to sit when it's finished, it's ready to go to the next stage. And what they do now is they take it to the prime shop and they use the high build primer to make sure, and then it gets block sanded. Wait until you see that next week.
The Noble Build-Up is brought to you by 1G Racing, purveyors of the Noble M12 GTO in North America.
Once the Noble M12 gets sanded, it comes here to the inspection tunnel. We've got 38 double bulb fluorescent lights. This thing is bright. Nothing's going to get missed. You can see the odd pinhole on the edges. They get filled in here, and then they get inspected again. Now keep in mind, fluorescent light is the harshest light for body and paint. Now after this process, it's ready to go to the priming stations, and that's over here. Well, the next stage, we take the car over to the priming booth, and what they do in the priming booth is they're going to use a color-tinted primer. So if the car ends up going blue, they're going to use a blue primer. If the car is silver, they're going to use a light gray primer. If the car is green, orange, they're going to use a similar color primer. What that does is they end up using less material, which is good, and they get better coverage. And if you ever get a stone chip, it's not quite as noticeable. From here, it's ready to get sanded. This car is going to be a white or silver car. It's got a light primer on it. There's a crew of 3 and 4 people, and they use state-of-the-art equipment. You've got a vacuum system DA that pumps all the dust out of here. Now, they're still using a safety mask, but it's important that you understand that at High Tech here, they've got state-of-the-art equipment. Everything is done professionally. Well, after the body's sanded with 400 grit on the DA, it's ready to move on, but they make sure they get all of the edges, all of the corners, so it's 100%. It gets final inspected back in the inspection tunnel, and then it moves off to the paint shop where it's ready for its final finish.
The Noble Build-Up is brought to you by 1G Racing, purveyors of the Noble M12 GTO in North America.
Well, last week we saw final prep of the Noble M12, and here at High Tech at the manufacturing plant, the next stage is to bring it to the spray booths. They've got 2 state-of-the-art downdraft spray booths here, and they've got the clean room. Well, the clean room is where they're going to blow it off, they're going to tack it down, then it's going to go into the spray booth. Depending what color the customer orders, of course the car was tinted that color, so the first step is to go into the mixing room. Again, state-of-the-art mixing room. They're going to mix the paint, they're going to do the base, they're going to have something like that tangerine color. It's going to have actually a base coat and then sort of a pearl put on top, and then it's going to get cleared. It's a 3-stage paint. So what they've done is they've now disassembled the body, and they have these jigs built, and the jigs actually separate the body far enough that they can get in all the corners and all the edges with color, and it gives them that consistency. Especially with pearls, it's really important to paint it all at once. So they explode the body on their jig, they get in all the corners, they make sure it's 100%. After this step is done, the car gets baked, and then what it does is it comes back out here, it gets inspected. They make sure they get all the edges, all of the corners. The next stage is sanding and polishing. They're going to dry sand it with 1500, maybe even 2000 grit. They're going to run a wool pad over it and get that perfect finish, what the customer's expecting.
The Noble Build-Up is brought to you by 1G Racing, purveyors of the Noble M12 GTO in North America.
Because the Noble M12 is a low production car, it doesn't make sense to set up an assembly line. Everything is hand built, everything is hand fabricated here, including the entire chassis. And what they've done is they've broken it down into components. They've got sub-assembly jigs here. This one here is for the front suspension. And what it allows is for it to be replicated over and over again. It doesn't matter what employee, doesn't matter what shift. And they've got probably 20 sub-assembly jigs here that once the product is built, it goes to the main jig. The next step is to take those subcomponents and put them on this chassis jig. What's interesting is how this chassis jig is actually built. What they do is they take the chassis, build it on a surface plate, the first prototype, then they reverse engineer it. And then what they do is they use these giant I-beams here to make sure it stays straight. They put the plates on, which are half-inch steel plates, and then it goes to a giant milling machine to make sure it's 100% level. And they're also going to do is make sure that these pickup points are in the exact same place every time. This is key, the suspension pickup points, because that's where the suspension is going to mount, and you want to make sure that it is exactly the same every time. As far as the welding is concerned, they have a pulse arc welder here, and what it does is it distorts the tubing a lot less and flattens out the weld, so there's less grinding involved later. And it's also able to weld sheet metal to the tubes. There's different gauge metals here, and it makes a nice bead. They can do it from top to bottom all in one throw. That's how the chassis is built, with a production team of maybe 20 people in this department, and they're able to duplicate it over and over again.
The Noble Build-Up is brought to you by 1G Racing, purveyors of the Noble M12 GTO in North America.
Well, so far in the building of the Noble M12, we've shown you the big components. We've shown you the body, the fiberglass, we've shown you the chassis, but in reality, in building a car, there are literally thousands of components. Well, here at Hi-Tech, they actually build 1,017 components right here in-house for the Noble. Everything from these hub assemblies that are built on the CNC machines back there, and there's literally dozens of CNC machines and operators, to small brackets, to fittings, to splines, to the brackets that hold the rear wing, to the bigger components. But what's interesting is this is a manufacturing plant. They're trying to increase the number of products built in-house here every single day. Well, not only do they machine parts here, they also have the welding and fabricating area. Over there, they do the aluminum welding, they build the radiators. Over here, they build the exhaust. They start with just a plain stainless steel tube. It's all mandrel bent, it's all TIG welded. They use this fixture to make sure they can duplicate the bends and duplicate the welding over and over again. They build the headers right in-house here. Start with small tubes. They have the header flange here. The header flange is milled perfectly flat, so when it fits up against the motor, there's not going to be any exhaust leaks. They even build their own catalytic systems. They actually buy the catalytic pipe itself, and then they add the reducers here. They add the flanges. They put in their own oxygen sensors. What they do is they have to weld in this bung. In order to do that, they use this tool here to locate the hole.
The Noble Build-Up is brought to you by 1G Racing, purveyors of the Noble M12 GTO in North America.
Today we're at Hi-Tech's assembly plant, and this is where the chassis comes in and gets mated to the body. The bare frame sits over here, and then the ultra suede is applied around the roll cage. Keep in mind, this car is a production car with a roll cage. I like it. What happens next is it comes over to this side here, and the sheet aluminum is riveted to the chassis. All the way around, you can see the aluminum rivets. Now we're ready to put the body right onto the chassis, and at this stage, they also add the wiring harness, all the radiator ducting. They put in all the air conditioning, all the stuff behind the dashboard, even the shift linkage and the steering column goes in at this point. The next stage is they actually put on the doors. They have the doors, the mirrors, the glass. All of those pieces are put in here. Now it's starting to take shape. Keep in mind that this body was already fitted once. The doors fit perfectly. Remember at the beginning of this season, the body and the doors and everything were put on the same chassis. Now they're coming back together again. Well, what happens now is they put on the bonnet, the front and the rear bonnet. and the lights get installed, and it starts looking like a car. Now you can see what the Noble's going to look like as a finished product. But here at Hi-Tech, quality control never stops, not until the car leaves the dock. Everywhere along the line, people have marked the paint, they've put little dots here, and that's for a small imperfection. Now, when this car gets finished 100%, it's going to go back, and all these little imperfections are going to be fixed before the car leaves this place.
The Noble Build-Up is brought to you by 1G Racing, purveyors of the Noble M12 GTO in North America.
Well, after the body is set down on the chassis and all the plumbing and all the electricals installed, it's time to put in the suspension. The suspension's fairly basic, but after driving this car, I'll tell you what, Lee Noble got it right on the M12. He hit the sweet spot. It really works. It's a tubular upper and lower A-arm. It's got a hub here that's actually machined right here on Hi-Tech's premises in the CNC room. The rotor and the calipers an AP piece made especially for Noble. The hat is machined right here in the CNC shop as well, making sure that it's duplicated every single time. The rack, it's a standard piece off the shelf. The ball joints are a standard piece off the shelf. The shocks, once they're installed, they're a Bilstein shock, fully adjustable with an H&R spring. Now let's go to the back suspension. The rear suspension really isn't that much different than the front. We're using a tubular A-arm upper and lower. Again, the hub's all machined here. The rotors and calipers, again, AP pieces, and keep in mind it's got 13.5-inch rear rotors as well as on the front. The only difference really to the rear suspension is this bar here, an adjusting bar for the toe for the rear. You gotta like how this guy thinks. He's got a tow hook, a factory tow hook on a street car. The other thing is what they're doing is when they're assembling, everything gets checked and double checked. They're using grade 8 hardware, they're using nylock nuts. After everything's torqued, there's an inspection mark put on every nut and bolt. After looking at the suspension, you gotta understand this car is built like a race car, and after driving it, you know it performs like one.
The Noble Build-Up is brought to you by 1G Racing, purveyors of the Noble M12 GTO in North America.
You can tell the interior was designed by a racer. The seats fit you nicely. They're built right here. They're comfortable. You know if you throw the car into the corner, you're not going to slide around. Comes factory with a 4-point harness. Comes factory with a dead pedal and a roll cage. The rest of the interior aesthetically is really nice to look at as well. Also comes with air conditioning, comes with a factory installed stereo. But let me show you how this interior is built. Let's go over to the upholstery shop. This is where the interiors are stitched together. The hides are rolled out onto the table, the patterns are marked out onto the leather, and then the girls cut it out here. From here, it comes over to where the girls sew together the patterns. And what they've done, even for the roof here, which is a diamond tough type pattern, they stitch it individually, they mark it out, and they actually sew in the pattern into the upholstery. Here you see a finished side, the inside of the seat, the insert. Some are perforated, some aren't. The perforation is specially done for Noble, as well as the embossing on the seats. Well, talking about the seats, remember earlier in the fiberglass shop, they had these buckets, they were built there. Now it's time to upholster them. They put in the foam bolsters on both sides, then they're glued down with leather. The center section is then inserted, and eventually you have the complete seat ready to bolt in. The only thing left is to put on the tracks. Side panels or door panels, remember back in the fiberglass shop, they were all manufactured right here. These panels are all marked so they know which car it belongs on. I wondered earlier why they were marked on this side, now I understand. The leather again has all been cut, all sewn. It gets glued over top of the panels, foam in the back here to just make sure the panel sits off against the door the proper amount.
The Noble Build-Up is brought to you by 1G Racing, purveyors of the Noble M12 GTO in North America.
Now that Hi-Tech's finished building the motor, the only thing left to install is the motor. Now Hi-Tech doesn't do the installation, but it comes ready to go. You've got the intercooler, it's already there. The air conditioning pump, it's already sitting there. The complete exhaust system that fits perfectly is sitting in the boxes. All the brackets, all the mounts are ready to go. It's a very easy installation. What do you install? Well, that's really up to you. But the motor of choice is the 3-liter Durotech. Doesn't sound real exciting, 220 horsepower. Add 2 Garrett T28 turbochargers, makes 350 horsepower. Change the map, makes 380 horsepower. All that in a 2,200 pound car, incredible performance. 0 to 60, 3.9 seconds. Standing quarter mile, 12.5 seconds. Top speed, we're not sure yet because they've just changed the gearbox from a 5-speed to a 6-speed. Nobody's taken it out and tested it yet. But I'll tell you this thing will fly. How about the lateral Gs? 1.1 easily by just about any driver out there. That's better than a street Porsche. I had a chance to take this thing to the track. The car is incredible. Now, how do you get into one of these cars? Well, they're going to be distributed in North America shortly. There's a fella down there who goes to the track, he's showing off the car. If you see this car at a racetrack, ask the guy for a test drive. You will be impressed. You'll be in for the ride of your life.
The Noble Build-Up is brought to you by 1G Racing, purveyors of the Noble M12 GTO in North America.
Over the last 12 weeks, we've watched the Noble M12 being built. Now it's time to drive it. The car is a nimble little car, 2,200 pounds, 380 horsepower, unbelievable brakes, but going around corners, I've never quite driven anything like that. It is so neutral. I can understand how it got 1.1 on the skid pad. Top end, I don't know. It's got 6 gears. I'm in 5th doing 130. As far as fun to drive, I haven't driven a car in a long time that is this much fun. Earlier today, we had a chance to take this car on the racetrack, and what it did out there was more than impressive. Let me just tell you this. All the performance figures they spout out about this car, 0 to 60 in 3.9 seconds, I think it's conservative. Standing quarter mile, 12.5, probably conservative. Top speed, they don't really even post, but I'll tell you, it's up there. Braking distances, they don't post, but I haven't driven a car that brakes any harder than this than maybe the GT3 Porsche and the Enzo and a couple of the supercars. But all in all, there's nothing that really comes close to this, especially in the price range. This is really a sports car. Tom all year has been trying to convert a regular car into a sports car. Tom, buy the real thing, and this is it.